Parcel shipping costs continue to rise, and consumers are getting tired of packaging waste. What if you could solve both problems at the same time? I'm James Malley, CEO and co-founder at Paccurate. Our packing intelligence platform helps you determine your ideal mix of box sizes and gives you complete control over how they're packed in real time, so you can minimize costs, delight your customers, and ship sustainably. Learn more at Paccurate.io.
Fading in. I'm back.
Got the fade
on the show. After a few weeks traveling the world, I figured I had to see it. And Thomas Wasson, Anthony bailed ship on me. He had to hold it down, though, so he had to bounce to Houston. I'm Zach Strickland, head of Freight Market Intelligence, and substituting for Anthony Smith this week, Thomas Wasson, that would have been good, here to discuss that freight economy. But we also have a special guest today, James Malley, who you just saw. He's going to come on and talk to us about sustainability and packaging here in just a minute. Sustainability is kind of I feel like during economic downturns, we have kind of this shift away from sustainability because everybody uses it as a term to be like, oh, I'm green. It doesn't necessarily mean like environmental stuff, in general. Like sustainability is how's the longevity of your business model?
Are we sustainable? Yeah, it can change topics, but one thing we always forget about in supply chain is it kind of gravitates towards that anyway. You want to be a little sustainable, leaner. I feel like instead of saying leaner, you can make it a win-win, and then you don't get yelled at as much as a CEO.
Yeah. But first off, before we bring James on here, let's get into the marketing too. I hadn't done it in a few weeks. I need to get loose. I need to get warm.
Get the rust off.
Let's shake the dust off if you want to count me in.
All right, here we go. We're going to go in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Let's do it. So the freight market itself, outbound tender volume index, demand continues to be strengthening throughout the month of September. You see that white line there is actually coming up really, really close, dangerously close to last year's OTVI value, which was on the downturn, of course, as we came out of a robust freight market, arguably one that we may never see again in terms of overall demand. My takeaway here is, are we in some sort of head fake or are we actually seeing a sustainable return? And I think we're actually in a little bit of a head fake here in terms of overall demand. Long haul volumes really driving the majority of this growth. If we go to the next chart, that's what I illustrate here, is the LOTVI, really the biggest figure, that white line there. Long haul volumes are growing. They're up year over year, 1% according to this chart right here. Everything else relatively down. COTVI has taken a big upturn, and that's the loads that are moving less than 100 miles. That's your city freight, also taking a big upturn, but really just kind of a late bloomer here in the overall sense that the market upturn has really come strongly from that long haul volume. That is the replenishment freight. That is the freight that absolutely is coming from the West Coast or coming actually a little bit from the East Coast nowadays into these DCs that is actually getting ready for that retail season peak. If we go to the next chart, we can see that the outbound tender rejection indexes for all three modes not really jumping up. Refrigerated is, having a moment here, renaissance, if you will, but that's largely due to the Northwestern and some of that higher Midwestern freight. Refrigerated seasonal freight volumes really picking up there. Harvest seasons in play. Of course, they're probably not going to last much longer, considering the van rejection rate still under 4%. Go to the last chart, NTIL, spot rates. They're not moving. They're actually kind of diminishing right now, and that's excluding fuel.
Definitely a lot to soak in here. Holy cow, we hit the bell. I was before the bell. Good Lord. Fix it in post, folks. Fix it in post. We messed up.
Yeah. So, the market itself, I think there's mixed signals. We've got this long haul freight demand that's really kind of out of season in August, but now we're in season for that long haul replenishment volume, getting ready for retail peak coming up, which many people don't really expect to be very strong.
We're definitely in this weird uncharted waters because if you're a demand planner, what's the worst thing in the world? Uncertainty, and especially the past 2 years, too much uncertainty. So we're in this weird situation where moving forward, even looking at spot rates, looking at contracted rates, we still can see that in the data.
Yeah, it's a weird world we're in. I think we're still dealing with a lot of that COVID fallout. As much as we don't want to say that word anymore, it is still a factor in this overall supply chain mess. So, without further ado, I want to kind of switch gears into setting up our next guest here, James Malley. No more fighting with spreadsheets. PackSimulate harnesses the power of Paccurate's patented cartonization algorithm so you can simulate millions of parcel shipments and identify your ideal carton mix. Learn more at Paccurate.io. And, I think his message today, we're going to talk about how sustainable packaging matters and how it can actually facilitate your business. And we're going into retail peak. So, James, thanks for joining us today. Welcome to the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I kind of want to set the table a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about Paccurate? I did the read there for your company, but tell us a little bit more about what you guys do.
Sure. So I imagine a large part of your audience would know the term cartonization. It's not a word in the dictionary, despite my pleas to Funk and Wagnalls and Webster's. But basically, it's systems that are able to identify the best way of packing SKUs into boxes for shipments, typically to consumers or store replenishment. And so that's really what our software does. We like to say it does it a little smarter, but we also provide tools to kind of, instead of optimize one shipment at a time, we're looking across all your shipments and kind of helping you evaluate SOPs and packaging selection.
Yeah, that's a daunting task. I came from LTL, and I know a lot. This is both. All modes of transportation can be impacted by packaging strategies here. So tell us a little bit about why shippers and retailers are shifting their focus to optimizing packaging now.
Sure. Well, there's really a few reasons. I think one, and as I was kind of looking up the latest numbers on this, I was kind of struck by the fact that there's not a ton of reporting at the moment on kind of the makeup of consumers this year, but I found some striking numbers. Gen Z, I guess, is the first headline. 32% of them shop online every day, compared to 25% of millennials. Are you guys millennials?
I'm a millennial. Are you on the tail?
I'm on the tail end. It depends on who you ask.
Honorary Gen X.
I'm sort of at the very edge of Gen X millennial.
Got it. I'm an elder millennial. And even 25% shopping every day. It sounds exhausting to me, but compared to, 7% of boomers. But point being, this is not like, Gen Z is not like, oh, those kids, eventually they'll start buying stuff. The oldest Gen Zer is 26 years old. So they're well on their way to kind of becoming a core part of the consumer landscape. Now, what makes that important is that 72% of them think that companies should be held accountable for waste and environmental footprint, and they're willing to make changes to make their footprint less. So that's pretty striking, and we see it, anecdotally, we see it where a lot of these brands are looking at packing efficiency, not just because of the cost savings opportunity that might be there, but because their customers are demanding it. The post-purchase experience is now a little bit more complicated than, a promise date and, nice to look at tracking information. When Gen Z and certainly a big degree of millennials get a poorly packed box, they're not just kind of grumbling quietly, they're making TikTok videos and kind of naming and shaming. And this eventually makes its way to the C-suite at a lot of these brands. And that's kind of where the momentum seems to be coming from. So I'm finding this breakdown and this kind of motivation for tackling this problem to be pretty fascinating.
Well, it feels to me like the buying experience as well. Millennials, we were at the very beginning of this e-commerce, and then as Gen Z and now Gen Alpha is being fully absorbed and living in this, packaging is one of those things that we're sleeping on because there's two opportunities. I feel like one thing I touched upon, I got to talk to you back in July, is not only is it important how you package and load it, the efficiency, so you're not wasting space and paying more, but also the potential to set yourself apart like a specific SKU and have that information there to show that you're doing it in a green way and having a better experience on the back end.
Yeah, the SKU mix.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, in the SKUs, I think people, different products, make the packaging process a little bit more daunting, especially when we're talking about retail freight, which has dimensions all over the place. Coming from LTL myself, the hardest thing to do was to figure out the load factor on a truck where you had multiple SKUs all over it. So, how can retailers with multiple SKUs actually work through this and maintain some accurate data?
Yeah, there's some challenges associated with it. When we started Paccurate, it seemed like nobody had dimensional data, and it was a sad time. In recent years, it's completely different. So, most of the, big kind of household name brands have made the effort. They put systems in place, not just for capturing these dimensions and the weights of all their SKUs, but figuring out how to maintain them and keep track of them. It's funny, the item master is usually what it's called, where
Right.
all the SKU data is kept. This is, over the years learning that this is, especially at larger organizations, kind of weirdly a hot potato. Like nobody knows who owns it or who's allowed to touch it. So, watching shippers kind of work through that and try to figure, okay, how do we use this instead of just keep it as this kind of sacred thing that nobody's allowed to manipulate?
Yeah, and it sits in some sort of archaic structure in the background that hasn't been touched either.
Exactly. In terms of collecting them, we partner with a company called Cubiscan. I think they're pretty well known, but they've got a lot of different solutions for dimensioning freight, and they've got cool stuff for wrapping pallets now at the same time. The model that's probably most relevant to our use case, which is putting stuff in boxes, is the Cubiscan 325. I don't know if you've ever played with one of those at a trade show or something, but they're quite cool. They make it really easy to just kind of like a scanner. You just move the handle over the top and it really accurately dimensionalizes. I think they use a stuffed bunny sometimes at trade shows to show off how accurate it is.
Yeah, that stuff's crazy. The W&I processes that we used to have to deal with. I would have loved, like back in the day when I was in the real world, as I call it, if we'd have had some sort of toy like that, I'd have been out there constantly on the dock dimensioning things. It's amazing what technology can do nowadays, and especially when you're talking about like moving goods, like finding those inefficiencies in the transportation and packing process. I think most of the time people look at like truckload, it's very truckload, the dimensions don't change, but there's a lot of space. That space inside of that truck can be very expensive. So if you don't get, accurate information around what's going on inside the vehicle, what's available to you, et cetera, and how you can kind of position your products together, it almost makes a shipper or a retailer kind of a transportation like process manager in a way.
Yeah, and you got to imagine with good package and cartonization policies, one thing that I'd be worried about if I'm a full truckload carrier is it's very wasteful and inefficient. Yeah. You can only fit so many pallets. You got all that open space. And so this tech that you all have and the processes you're working on is super fascinating because it does feel like with generational buying patterns, the future is this small niche e-commerce, I was hearing about airdrop shipments for Air Jordan, small amounts of shoes, and it's very limited releases. So this is super fascinating stuff that y'all are working on. And when we're looking at the sustainability aspect as well, is this a situation where it has to be different, or is this sustainability something that we can package in when we're selling the C-suite and just say, look, it's just operational efficiency by another term, but it happens to give us more from it if we add this extra dimension?
Yeah, a lot of times when I'm talking to shippers, I'll of course, try to extol the value of the technology that we've built, but I also just try to explain that this is a special problem, packing efficiency and making sure you have the right boxes, because your sustainability and your costs are extremely tightly correlated. Basically, every cost center, whether it's the packaging or how much space you're taking up. They're the same thing. You're paying to basically emit. So whether the organization is more motivated by hitting some green targets, great. Here's an initiative where you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. If you're more in the cost savings mode, which you alluded to at the top of the show, then great. Now you can also track the sustainability metrics that come along with it. And not to betray my kind of nerdiness for the subject, but if you're focusing on the carton level first, with the economies of scale we're usually dealing with, it kind of acts like a liquid. Mm-hmm. So all that space savings kind of bubbles up through fewer pallets and then fewer truckloads. And you can kind of draw a line from the carton level all the way to the amount of trucks that you're going to use. So that's kind of what we get excited about.
Yeah, no, I love it, because a lot of times we see people, and I want to ask you this question about when you're talking to some of your customers or potential customers, are they alarmed at the amount of inefficiency that's available for them to kind of, address here in terms of available space that they can find?
Yeah, there's some awkward conversations sometimes. I think partially because we as humans are generally kind of bad. I mean, us too. We're generally bad at looking at and understanding three-dimensional space. Right. I was if I can remember the numbers, there was a survey of e-com executives that thought that their packages were 25% air, and that was the opportunity. But then when they actually went and looked, on average, there was 57 and then up to 65% air in some product categories like households. So there's a certain amount of easing into realizing the scope of the opportunity. And we try to call it an opportunity and not kind of a rolling disaster that may be unfolding.
I can imagine they're just hoping it manages a ship. That's what it feels like coming from transportation. A lot of these execs are probably like, oh, thankfully somebody picked it up. And then later that framing, when you realize, oh, I could have done this with less?
Well, the devil's in the details in this situation. And I think, back in the day, technology made it really hard to identify this type of problem, or this type of opportunity, I should call it, because it wasn't a problem until it's a problem. And I think this environment, in America, we kind of don't know what we don't know, until it becomes an issue, a greater issue. And with the advent of e-commerce and all of these boxes, I mean, I myself, I'm not Gen Z, but we do probably buy more stuff online than we do at stores at this point in time. And we have boxes and boxes that just pile up. I mean, my wife would kill me, but yes, she tends to have several boxes that I get to open under my name, generally waiting every week. And then what do we do with it? We have to recycle it, and they're these huge cumbersome pieces. So, I mean, identifying, I think on the front end of that, there is so much potential savings in terms of not just the environment, which is obviously a great benefit, that's been a little bit politicized, but it's also something that we should all be thinking about, but costs on the front end. So, James, I want to ask you one last question here before we move forward, but what other considerations should retailers keep in mind to address sustainability goals?
Yeah, I think, materials tends to get a lot of attention in terms of, thankfully we're not seeing styrofoam packing peanuts anymore that fly all over your house when you open the boxes. Some of these greener options are actually excellent, but they still kind of come with a premium. So I guess, like I said before, focusing on packing efficiency, making sure you have the right size boxes is a great thing to do in parallel to kind of pay for whatever initiatives you have for material. And then, some of the bigger shippers we talk to, they're actually, gearing up for the SEC starting to require Scope 3 emissions reporting. Right. And transportation is 70% of most shippers' Scope 3 emissions. So this is if it's not on the radar now, it soon will be.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked about it here a lot and some of our other outlets about, it's coming. The environmental stuff's coming, whether you want it to be there or not. The government influence is there. It's kind of pushing us in that direction. So
it's going to be fun to watch, because I know that if you're a large multinational corporation that does extensive packaging, even at a country by country basis, you may need to change your SKUs, because some countries like the prepackaged stuff because it's a sign of safeness. That was my far out question for you. Is this something that for applications not only in the U.S. but internationally, I can only imagine, is this where we need to start looking at packaging, and maybe when we're thinking of SKUs, have some kind of unified thing, so we may see some kind of cross blending? Because I know that if you go across the ocean to other locations, they're doing a lot more packaging of certain items versus maybe in the U.S. where we're just using one package and having multiple things in it.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing some trends carry over here. Something that kind of started at the same time in the U.S. and overseas, where the fast mover SKUs, kind of like the flagship SKUs that a brand might have, they have custom cutout packaging. So that not only makes the box more efficient, you can fit more on a pallet, but it also makes for a great, unboxing experience. And then you'll always have, accessories, even if you're just kind of a hot D2C brand with a flagship SKU. So I think there's not going to be like a one size fits all kind of solution, unfortunately. But definitely as a lot of the regulations that are, seem like they're coming here in the next year or two, they're all modeled very heavily over on what's going on in the EU. So we're definitely keeping a close eye on that.
Having just come back from Italy, I can say that the EU is a little bit more down the line versus America in terms of their sustainable practices. Well, thank you so much, James, for joining us today, and thank you for the insights. Any last words? Where can people reach out, find you? I know we've said it before, but remind them.
Yeah. You can visit Paccurate.io, and there's a little chat button. You'll talk to somebody on our team, or you can find me on LinkedIn. I love talking about this stuff. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, James, and be sure to reach out to him. And he mentioned a company called Cubiscan, and I love this technology. Again, I came from LTL, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention them. This dimensioning technology that is coming up so quickly. Like we were out there with measuring tapes and things like that, and these scales that were archaic. I mean, just having some of these things. But Cubiscan, we provide dimensioning, weighing, and integrated systems that increase efficiency and profitability. A WMS, ERP, TMS, or IMS is only as good as the data that powers it. We help you collect accurate product, parcel, and pallet data that you can use to power the software systems within your warehouses, distribution centers, and cross docks. So, I mean, it all kind of works together. I think it's interesting they partner with a company like this in terms of like identifying some of these inefficiencies that are on a truck that people just don't think about.
Yeah, you get so caught up, you get so lost in the sauce operationally that you can forget easily. And I love the applications, because we're going to start seeing, this is just the beginning, LiDAR applications for making sure that we're scanning dimensions in space. It's kind of a new frontier. We're going from analog to digital, and these folks are at the very front end of it. This is going to be a great development to watch.
And FedEx UPS just announced GRIs, last
Here
week.
It comes. Yeah.
Mark Solomon just talked about GRIs. One of the things I think people have been, and I've talked to several people lately about how they're expecting cost reductions in transportation. Parcel's not in that same boat. And I think it's interesting the policy that they're going to implement, potential rate increases right around peak volumes. Some of the holidays, they're talking about Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, not just Christmas and Thanksgiving, not just retail peaks type situations. And, that actually probably has a bigger impact on overall spend in a lot of retailer cases than some of the bigger trucks.
It's a constant squeeze, and you really got to watch out, because we are starting to see startups attacking at the heels. We're seeing folks that are trying to do combinations, look at like Smart Cargos and a few others that are trying to come up with novel ways. USPS, Postal Service, did not do an increase. So I wonder as well, how much overflow will it be where customers, because even Amazon, UPS, and FedEx, there's a little bit of switching around, and sometimes Amazon will get USPS to do last mile or final mile. It's very fascinating to watch this development, because it feels as though, I know that they have higher costs. I know we're going through this higher cost period, but how long can you get away with this before you may potentially put yourself in danger from competitors slowly gaining market share, because it is squeezing folks?
Yeah, for sure. And I know, I want to cover one last story here that I think is relevant. I talked about the demand side indicators showing some pretty positive things for trucking overall. And I want to get your take on it, because ACT just came out with their report saying that for-hire trucking sees green shoot in August. So they're seeing similar things here. It's not necessarily manifesting into a tighter market necessarily. It is more just saying that things look like they're turning. We've kind of floored out for a period of time. What do you think? Do you think this is a head fake, or you think we got...
Given how long it has been, I do think if you look in the cycle, ACT does talk about where we are in a typical cycle. It's like 20 to 28 months. So we're kind of in the money right now. Two things that stuck out. One, I do believe we reached a bottom, but we're just rolling on the bottom, which is progress because it's not following. Two, driver availability. They have an index on how easily it is to get drivers. We always forget about that. Right now, it is real easy to get drivers right as you can't get freight for them. So this stuff to me does tell me that we should see some improvement, at least probably by early 2024 is what the consensus says. Yeah. I'm not going to make a call just yet because I'm waiting on the data. By the time I'll know, it's going to be like a few weeks out. That's how this industry works, but at least we're getting faster at predicting it.
Yeah, I think you're right to an extent. I don't think this demand is sustainable, but I do think capacity is reducing fast enough to where it is eventually going to run right into it. Supply-demand curve right there. And I think I think we're going to see that in Q2. Probably next.
I'd say Q2 because one thing we know is there's too much trucks. One thing that's hard to predict is when does the balance scales tip? And given all the information, that's what we're having to feel out.
Yeah, we know one thing's for sure. This will not last forever.
Truth. It'll get better one day.
Yeah.
Hang in there.
All right. Y'all have a great week.